Good parenting takes time and effort. We've talked about this several times. The quantity of time and the quality of parenting both matter. You don't want to be too punitive, but you also don't want to be too detached. And so we'll talk about the 4 parental styles of parenting. You've probably heard of these before. Authoritarian parenting. This is a restrictive, punitive style. There's little verbal exchange. Do what I told you to do because that's what I said. That's what I said. That's a good example of authoritarian verbal exchange. They spank frequently. They have rigid rules. They don't really explain them. The kids of these parents typically are unhappy, fearful. They don't communicate very well, and the sons usually end up being aggressive. The authoritative parenting, they place limits while encouraging independence. There are extensive verbal gives and takes where the parents are warm. You shouldn't have done this. Let's discuss it. That's going to be an authoritative style. The authoritarian would never say something like that. The authoritative, they have high expectations. They want a mature and independent kid, and these kids are generally cheerful, and they have good self-control. They're friendly with their peers. They cooperate well, and they handle stress well. Neglectful parenting, they are very uninvolved. The child might feel like that the parent has more important things to do than to raise them, and so they have maybe some poor self-esteem because of that. Socially incompetent, poor self-control, immature, they're alienated from their family, and eventually in adolescence can lead to delinquency. Indulgent parenting, very involved but with few demands. They don't really learn how to control their behavior because they always get their way. These parents sometimes think that they're creating a creative, confident kid, but they usually have difficulty controlling their behavior. They're egocentric and they have a lot of problems with their peers. I can almost tell what kind of a parent a student has had, especially when we get into the group projects. When I start seeing problems, like one member is doing this, one member is doing that, and they talk to me about it, it's like really clear to see. It's like, okay, this person probably had an authoritative parent, and this person either had, indulgent. And indulgent is a lot. I see a lot more indulgent than I do neglectful, just because of the indulgent are going to be more likely to make it into college than the ones that are neglectful, because again, that neglectful can lead to things like delinquency, which is going to lead to not being able to get into college. But anyways, sometimes you can kind of see it, what kind of parents that they had. On these styles, it involves basically dimensions of acceptance and responsiveness and demand and control. You've got, again, it's another fine line trying to balance all these things. There's a chart here if you would like to look at it on figure 3 that goes through some of these. So related to this is going to be corporal punishment. It's legal in every state in the U.S. Most individuals have a favorable attitude towards corporal punishment and likely remember their parents using it on them. Some research suggests that corporal punishment is associated with higher levels of aggression in childhood and adolescence. Spanking's been linked to antisocial behavior, cheating, telling lies, getting into fights. But this research is all correlational, so you can't run a true experiment with spanking. So, which comes first? Are you spanking the kid and then the kid starts doing bad stuff? Or is the kid already doing bad stuff and then you start spanking them? Some research suggests that negative effects of physical punishment are not as clear-cut as they once believed. In the spanking studies, they usually don't distinguish between severe and mild spanking. They don't distinguish between spanking that's done in a calm, collected manner versus done in a out of your mind anger. As a related note, I've seen several kids spanked in public. I think every single time it's been at Walmart. I've seen this 4 or 5 different times. A parent will spank their kid at Walmart. And whenever they do it, they're never like, here are the things that you did wrong, and now I'm going to spank you for that. The parents at Walmart never do that. They just start wailing on their kids. And they look like maniacs. They look out of control when they're doing this in the middle of the store, spanking their kids. If you are going to do spanking, according to the research, what you want to do is sit down in a calm and controlled manner and explain why the punishment is occurring, and then give them a mild punish form of spanking and not a severe form of spanking. You don't want to provide the model of someone that's out of control, because if you provide a model of someone that's out of control, your kid is going to be out of control, and then you're going to have to spank them even more, and it's just this big, huge cycle. Spanking can also cause the child to fear the parent, and it can also be abusive if it's done too severely. I'm sure you can probably guess. I do not spank Leif. I think that there are more effective ways to get my point across without as many negative side effects that spanking has. That being said, a lot of people still swear by it. There are some cultural differences. In some cultures, it seems to not have as much of the negative correlations that it does in this culture. So, but at least for me, it's like, I think to be on the safe side, I'm just not going to do that. Most child psychologists do recommend handling misbehavior by reasoning with the child, explaining the consequences of what they've done. Some people say timeouts can be effective. Some people are not on board with timeouts either. They consider that a little bit too harsh. But again, cultural contexts are going to be significant here. In countries where physical punishment is considered normal, the effects of physical punishment are less harmful to the children's development, according to some research. It's when the physical punishment involves abuse that's when it can be harmful to the child's development. There is figure 4, corporal punishment in different countries. So like South Korea does it quite frequently, US pretty frequently as well. It just all of a sudden hit me. I wonder, because you see Sweden's here really low. I wonder if there's a correlation between spanking and happiness, because some of the Norwegian countries are some of the most happy in the world. I don't know. I wonder if there's a correlation there. It'd be interesting to see. Anyways, kind of related is children maltreatment. So child abuse refers to both abuse and neglect. Child maltreatment is a term that most often used by developmentalists because it is more of an umbrella term that includes everything. There could be physical abuse, it could be child neglect, it could be sexual abuse, it could be emotional abuse. So they call all that maltreatment. And these usually occur in some type of combination. There's also a combination of factors that can lead to this, including culture, the neighborhood, the family, development. Those all likely to contribute to maltreatment. The text says that the extensive violence in American culture is often reflected in violence in the family. Family-associated characteristics that contribute to child maltreatment include parenting stress, substance abuse, social isolation, single parenting, and SES difficulty, especially poverty. We've talked about SES quite a few times too. So only about 1/3 of parents who are abused go on to abuse their own children. So think about this again, or I'll say it again. Think about it. 1/3 of parents who are abused go on to abuse their own children. It's actually a good number, because if you think about it from a modeling perspective, you would think that if you were abused, you're definitely going to abuse your kids. And that's what a lot of people think. If you were abused, you definitely abuse your kids. It's not true. It's only about 1/3 of people that go on to do that. And probably one of the reasons for that is because the people that are abused, they understand it. They're like, I know how that made me feel. I'm not going to do that to my kid. So if you think about it, 1/3, it's better than what a lot of people think it is. Some of the consequences for maltreatment, as I'm sure you're probably already aware, poor emotional regulation. They're going to have attachment problems, difficulties working with other people, peer relationships. They'll have difficulties in school, other psychological problems, depression, delinquency. Later in adult years, individuals who are maltreated as children are more likely to experience physical, emotional, and sexual problems. Figure 5 talks about abnormal stress hormones in levels of young children in different types of rearing conditions. And so this is middle SES, and then this is maltreated young children in foster homes. And so this is the percentage that have abnormal stress hormones. So it's only like 5% for the kids that are in, decent homes. For the maltreated kids in foster homes, their stress hormones are 35% of them have abnormal stress hormones. So, that's terrible. That's setting them up to again on the path. That's definitely going to be a huge factor determining what path you're going to go down. If your stress hormones are always out of whack, it's definitely going to affect your life, especially when you're a kid. And then briefly, to finish up this part, let's talk a little bit about parent and child relationships. Adolescents are going to push for autonomy during this time, and it can cause a little bit of conflict. The parent is having to give up power to the kid is trying to take it, and hopefully, if you've been doing these other things we've talking about, that transition won't be too severe. There's also figure 6 talks a little bit about this, that this is the old model for parental adolescent relationships, was that it was a big conflict and it's filled with storm and stress every day on a daily basis. But the new model is that, again, that parents are acting as these managers, and if you're doing these things, that the transition is kind of smooth. So you'll have moderate parental adolescent conflict, and it can actually serve a positive developmental function. You have these conflicts, these minor conflicts with your parents, and you learn how to negotiate those in a proper manner. And when you can do that with your parents at this age, then you can go on to do it with your peers. And then, when you get older and you go into the workforce, you can work with other people. The conflict that parents and adolescents have is it's usually everyday issues, cleaning stuff up, things of that nature, pretty small stuff. It's usually not major dilemmas. It's usually not going to be things like drugs or delinquency. And then conflicts becomes less frequent in later adulthood. So basically the point of all that is that the conflict is not as bad as people used to think it was between parents and adolescents. And that those small conflicts are actually building, basically negotiating confidence with the adolescents. That being said, if you do have prolonged conflict and it's over bigger issues, it can be associated with a whole bunch of negative things like moving out of the home, juvenile delinquency, school dropout, pregnancy, early marriage, even things like religious cult memberships, drug abuse, of course. All right, that's it for this section. On the next set of slides, we'll talk about siblings.